is exactly what he expected us, or didn't expect us to do, but exactly what he wanted us to do and hoped that we would do. But since we've done that, we don't change our policy. We just continue the same old policy, and the bankruptcy will come, and then we'll have to change. Same way with the Fed. We're probably not going to legislate the Fed out of existence. I work on all kinds of ways. Get rid of them tomorrow, get rid of the Fed, audit the Fed, do whatever. And I've introduced this notion to allow just competition with the monopoly, because they're a monopoly and they control it. But when they destroy the dollar, they will destroy themselves, and the burden will fall on a new generation to come up with some answers. And you'll have to have some answers. You'll have to either decide that you want to live in a totalitarian society or a free society. And if you want a free society, we have the information, we have the ideas, we need the determination. We will never have a large majority ever understanding all the issues. But if you have a significant number in a minority who are eager enough to spread a message and lead, we will be able to get our country out of this and talk about sun money and sensible foreign policy and civil liberties, shrink the size of government, regional government. We should always argue the case that the more local the government, the better. Self-determination, whether it's international or domestic or local, I think is a good one. Why should people always think that bigger is better when it comes to government? The largest amount of freedom you have is what we want, not the bigger the government, because that is exactly the opposite. The bigger the government, the less liberties you're going to have. One of the problems that we have, because I think my goal in life is to have a society where we can all work for our own virtue and excellence. And that means you make your own choices. You can make good choices or bad choices. If you make bad choices, you suffer the consequence and nobody else. But you make the decisions on what kind of life, what kind of religious life you want, what type of intellectual life you want. And if you make those decisions, you have to live with them. If the government gets involved in telling you how to be virtuous, how you're going to be a better person, how you're going to be more healthy, making sure that you can't even allow your kids to ride a tricycle without a helmet on, and all the kind of thing. The government's always going to be, the nanny state taking care of us. If you allow the government to tell us how we're going to be safe and how what these conditions, it only can be done by removal of liberty. And it's the liberty, the issue of the liberty, the right for you to make your own decision. I think the First Amendment is a good example of how we should look at this. Most people understand the First Amendment. They know about religious freedom and the freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And we know that we don't have freedom of speech to talk about the weather. We have freedom of speech, so I can come here and get a few things off my chest. But when it comes to personal habits, it seems to be completely different. We recognize that intellectually you're allowed to have your own personal choices in religious matters, and that's pretty important. That is dealing with your hereafter and eternity. But when it comes to your own body, you're not allowed to make your decisions. They're going to make all the decisions for you. And I think the government should be out of it, out of those decisions. You get to make all your decisions intellectually, monetarily, and on your personal habits. And I think we'd all be better for it. I think that would create a society where people are free as individuals, as we all have been born, with our freedoms and our liberties, which then should release the creative energy that we would have to solve our problems. But everybody at the other side is going to say, oh no, you just don't care. You're not humanitarian. How are you going to take care of the poor and the people won't get medical care? There's no proof of that. There is absolute evidence to show the bigger the government, the worse the quality of education is, and the worse the quality of our prosperity. We are a poorer nation the more the government is involved. So Liberty, approximately 100 years ago or so, was divided into two pieces. For some reason, our country got this all mixed up. The founders understood that personal liberty and economic liberty were one and the same. But for some reason, we drifted away from that, and we had one group over here that's reasonably good on, say, economic liberty, and another group over here a little bit better on personal liberties and personal civil liberties. And there was a time when there were elements in both the right and the left that thought we should be doing a lot less overseas. But liberty is one thing. Liberty is your life. And one thing that I have come around to saying is this challenging statement, because some people don't like this. I believe there's no collective rights. I don't believe you get a right by law because you belong to a group. I don't think you should ever be penalized because you belong to a group, but you shouldn't have any privileges because you belong to a group. You have your rights. You have your rights because your rights come to you in a natural or God-given way, and you have a right to your life and your liberty. And if we allow our rights to be squandered, which I believe we are, we're in big trouble. We will lose this whole chance for this experiment. So the burden really falls on the next generation who's moving in with ideas. There'll be the teachers, and there'll be the people in politics. They'll be doing the many things. But things are moving so much faster. In the 50s and 60s, when I first started getting interested in this, things moved so slowly. The ideas were slow to spread about. But just think of the rapidity of spreading ideas now, and the organizations through the internet. I mean, we don't have to wait for the government-approved programs to tell us what we're supposed to believe. We have a chance, really, to do so much more because of the conditions that are happening. The bad news is good news because the people are waking up. I never dreamed. If you'd have asked me 5, 6 years ago that we would get a lot of attention over the Federal Reserve as we're getting right now, I wouldn't have believed that. But the conditions, the markets are telling us there's a serious problem. At the same time, the spreading of the information, the teaching of Austrian economics is all coming together. So the revolution is really an intellectual revolution. It's an intellectual revolution. That is where we're winning. And it's going to get tough. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But there's every reason in the world to believe that if we do our job, we can solve these problems. So many young people, especially, come, okay, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? What's my exact job? Do I run for this office? Do I do this? Or should I go to school? You know, you do what you want to do. And if you believe in liberty, there will always be a role for you to play. But the most important thing is to be able to take care of yourself. That's number one. And also to study the freedom philosophy, to understand and reveal to your neighbors and friends and the people you can, and get after your members of Congress and help. Because, you know, they signed on to auditing the Fiat not because I persuaded them. It's because you persuaded them. You talked to them and sent a message. So there is a role for everybody to play. One thing that I also am convinced of is that those individuals, many here in this audience, as I felt at one time, once you believe you tend to understand this, you know, you're going to have a hard time sitting on your hands because you have a greater obligation. Most people don't get interested. Most people wouldn't come to a lecture like this. But most people will go along if the prevailing attitudes are changed, and those of you who are interested in this subject is to influence the prevailing attitudes, to get people to change their minds and accept it. People, when they know it's in their best interest to be arguing for their freedoms, and their best interest to bring our troops home, and their best interest to get rid of the Fed, they're going to support it. They're not going to argue with it. And right now, today, most people are starting to realize that their interests aren't best served with what we're getting out of Washington, because things are getting worse, the deficits get worse, and they talk back and forth, and we know the parties aren't significantly different. We spend all this money, and lives are lost spreading democracy around the world. At the same time, we have a hard time even getting a third party on tickets and getting ballot status and getting in debates. So we have a long way to go. But where the real excitement is the energy that comes from the younger generation, the college people especially, and all those who are young in heart. Believe me, people are recognizing this, and the burden is falling on your hands, because we're not going to solve this problem next week or next month. That budget isn't going to be balanced. The crisis is going to come. The only question is, what are we going to allow it to be replaced with? Are we going to allow tyranny to come, a man on a white horse come down and say, I'll take care of you, I can do this? The one thing that you have, one rule you have to follow, and that is, in order to make the world a better place, you have to reject the notion that you use violence and force to do it. You have to do it through persuasion. If we want to change the world, if we want to change the Middle East, if we want to change Africa, you do it by spreading ideas and through persuasion. But the most important thing we do is do our job here, set an example so others would want to emulate us, and that should be our goal. All right, thank you very much.
We'd like to thank everyone for coming. It was a great event tonight. You're excellent audience, and very glad you came. Sadly, because of the weather and Ron Paul's schedule, for him to get back to Texas, he's going to have to leave pretty much immediately. We're not going to be able to have a meet and greet session with him, as he does sometimes at some of his meetings. But we really appreciate y'all coming out, and